All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our ruckus crowd. I can't believe we fit all of you in here. I'd like to welcome you to our October chapter meeting. We're now too deep into this season. We've got quite a ways to go, but I would love to see this room continue to fill up with members and sponsors, again, to get back to that press the flesh networking. I know we're still working our way through COVID, but to be able to see a little fuller audience, I think would be great for all of us involved. But those of you who are able to make it, thanks for being here. We've got a great presentation today. Nathan Mueller is joining us. I'm going to go through a couple of business notes first. When I look at the chapter and how it's enriched, both financially and intellectually, I'd be remiss if I wasn't able to thank our sponsors for everything that they do for us. You can see we've got 2 pages deep of those organizations that support this organization and its members. And what I would like to do is I'd like to spend a little bit of time introducing you to some of these sponsors that we have. So what we'll do is we go through these chapter meetings, we'll highlight a couple of sponsors, and we've got Rob Fleming from Aon that's been gracious enough to come up here and tell us a little bit about himself and a little bit about the fine organization that supports this chapter. So Rob?
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. And great to see everybody. I think as a couple of us have been talking, it's fantastic to be out and actually seeing people and getting in the car and driving somewhere. So fantastic to be here. We just had our logo up a little bit earlier, and if any of you watched the Ryder Cup, you might have seen Aon's name once or twice. We became a big sponsor of the Ryder Cup for the next 3 years, so we're very, very proud of that. And a key piece of that actually is the Jacqueline Nicholas Award, which is really built around sportsmanship and competitiveness within the Ryder Cup. So fantastic to see, and even better when it's sitting in our backyard here at Whistling. So my name is Rob Fleming. For those I haven't met, I'm the managing director for Aon in Wisconsin. We have 2 offices in Wisconsin, one in Milwaukee and one in Green Bay, and I oversee both of those. And we are part of a larger organization, over 50,000 people, 550 offices in 120 countries. And while that's big in nature, we still work with companies of all sizes, smallest companies to Fortune 100 and everything in between, and really support companies in kind of 3 areas, really: risk, retirement, and health. And helping organizations as they're trying to deal with volatility and risk, and how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to deal with a resilient workforce? Or are there different and more unique ways to access capital? So we're addressing everything in all 3 of those spaces. So pretty broad scope. It sounds very, very broad, but there's lots of different ways to deal with those, and that's exactly how we're working with clients today in risk, retirement, and health. Here today with me is Skylar Stecker. Many may know Skylar in the back there, so if there are any specific questions or anything we can address, we'd love the opportunity to talk, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and the long-term strategic partnership we've had here with FEI and a lot of you in the room here. So thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Rob, and I appreciate your practice development session a little bit earlier on PEPs. That's certainly getting a lot of talk at our organization, so grateful for that. Start at the beginning of the alphabet and then start somewhere near the end. Ben Laframboise from Von Briesen is here. Ben, if you spend a few minutes telling us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're very pleased to be a sponsor here. So a little bit of introduction to Von Briesen and Roper. So we have about 170 attorneys in 9 offices, including Chicago and New York. In Northeast Wisconsin, we have 2 offices and about 20 lawyers that call Northeast Wisconsin home. Having 20 lawyers in the area allows us to have a fair amount of specialty, pretty deep specialties right here in Northeast Wisconsin. Our pitch in Northeast Wisconsin is you don't have to go to Milwaukee to get first-rate legal counsel. We're all sitting right here with the capacity to do so. Von Briesen has some real exceptionally deep strengths. I mean, some of those areas where we have what we would consider state-leading practices would be tax disputes, estate planning, and intellectual property. We have our Chicago office is a very strong leading intellectual property firm. You could say nationwide. For us personally, we have a very strong labor and employment practice in Northeast Wisconsin. Like I say, you don't have to go to Milwaukee to get those kind of services. Myself, I work in several areas. I spend about half my career in-house in very large, one particularly very large company. So I bring a perspective that you often don't get from lawyers who've been in firms their entire career. Being on the buy side of legal services certainly gives you a different perspective than being on the sell side. And we bring that to every transaction. So I work at a mergers and acquisition practice, a debt structuring and documentation practice, and because of my in-house experience, a pretty deep construction-related practice as well, which all relates to finance. So my undergraduate degree is in accounting, so I kind of can take to that area and speak that language. So when you have legal services, we would just respectfully request that you consider Von Briesen to provide those services. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that, Ben, and I appreciate Von Briesen's support of this chapter. I really do. All right. In the interest of time, I think we'll move past this, but I hope you take the opportunity to introduce yourselves, get to know each other. Those of you that are here, hopefully you can participate in the social afterwards and enjoy the pleasure of each other's company. I made an appeal in my president's message. I think I referred to it as a captain's corner, to see if I could spark some interest in getting individuals involved more with the board. As I mentioned, one of my concerns is the continued succession of leadership within this organization, and I'm happy to stand here today and assume this responsibility for the next season, and then Peggy and Cynthia will take on after that. But what you probably don't know is that if there's not a third, Cynthia will continue to be the chapter president for perpetuity until the chapter finally decides to dissolve. Cindy didn't know that when she took this on, but yes, that is in fact how this chapter charter has been structured. So, Cynthia, thank you for your commitment to this organization. But in all seriousness, when I look at the great board that we have, we're longer. Some are longer in tenure than others. It's a very engaging board. The amount of effort that goes into this, I don't want to say is insignificant, because it's not. But when you look at everybody who knows their job and does it exceptionally well, it mitigates the amount of work that any one person has to do. And again, it's a very collegial group. So I would welcome anybody to come on, not necessarily come onto the board, but explore what the opportunity is. I mean, again, when Mike McNamara approached me 5 years ago now and said, would you consider being the chapter president? And I said, well, yeah, why not, right? A lot can happen in 5 years. I move every 4, so I won't be here. But I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that, because it allowed me to see great leaders within this chapter, and I couldn't be more proud to stand in front of you and continue that legacy of fine chapter leaders. This program is eligible for 1 CPE credit, so those of you that are here, I hope you signed up on the sheets outside. If you are online, you're going to need to stick around through Nathan's presentation, which, as we've been talking earlier, could go as long as 3 hours, depending upon how we get rolling. We will bring the beverage cart in here about 45 minutes in, so those of you online might have to stick around a little longer to get CPE. Meanwhile, we'll be enjoying each other's company and libations. Okay, make sure that you fill out the survey. Your feedback is very important to us. We do react to it, so don't miss that opportunity. Things that are going on. I am incredibly proud of the efforts that Jill Bean and friends have done with respect to this diversity and inclusion group. Jill took the initiative, put a book club together. I can't remember, we had more than 24 professionals that attended that, and Jill has another stellar opportunity in front as well. So if you got the opportunity to sign up for that, Jill runs a great show, very engaged group. Please be part of that if you can. And peer networking, one of our greatest groups. I can't remember what the attendance is. It's always somewhere between 25 and 30. Thursday, December 16th from 2 to 4:30. It is a virtual event. I do know this, when we talk about leadership succession, I know Denise is looking for somebody that can be her successor. So if you participate in the peer group and you're looking to lead that, I think it's a great opportunity to step into Denise's shoes. Again, she understands how this chapter works. She has to be there forever until her successor comes along. So help Denise out, if you will. Our next meeting is going to be right back here in Bridgewood. We've got Kurt Bauer from WMC that's going to be presenting to us, and I'm interested in what his thoughts are on the great state of Wisconsin and the influence that manufacturing is having. I'm interested in hearing his thoughts on the political environment. Hopefully he can stay out of Washington and focus his efforts here on what's going on with our legislative environment. But Kurt is guaranteed to impress. So that's it for the business end of this meeting. I want to introduce Nathan Mueller. That Nathan took $8.5 million. I don't want to steal the punchline, but one of the things that I think is interesting is, here's an individual that grew up in a great family, loved his mom, went to a great school, had a great job, had everything going for him, right? But he found himself in a set of circumstances probably not that different than some of us find ourselves in, right? He had pressure. He had opportunity. If you're working a small business, even a large business, you've got opportunity, right? And then he had the third leg of the fraud triangle is rationalization. So when you take that mix, right, and in this day and age, right, with all of the bad things that are going on, all the pressures that we have, if you think about that fraud triangle that Nathan's going to talk about, think about how it could affect you. Because I'll argue that you and me are not that different from Nathan, right? It's all about the choices that we'll make. So I do know this. Don't judge Nathan for what he's done. That's already been taken care of by the courts. Judge him for the insights that he's going to provide us, right? Because I know there's a lot of people that probably want to call him bad names, but I also know you go by the name of son and father and husband. So that's what I'm interested in hearing, Nathan. I'm interested in hearing those insights. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, that's one of the better introductions I've ever had. So those are things I can't say to people. I'm going to talk about my fraud today. Not just the how, but the why too. Why did I do it? Why did a somewhat normal person heading down, a pretty good path take the road that I took and make the choices I made. So also talk about the personal side of my story, which I think is really important. There's a fraud, there's debits and credits, there's some interesting things in there, but there's also a personal side, a lot of lying, a lot of manipulation, and a lot of consequences to me and the people in my life. So I'm going to kind of talk about all of that stuff. It's going to be a little fluid time-wise. They gave me an hour, but if people have more questions, I'm fine taking more questions. So, and also as far as questions go, I'm really open to anything anybody wants to know about. I don't think a presentation like this is truly as helpful as it can be and as educational if I'm not willing to be 100% honest about everything. So I talk to a lot of different kinds of groups and I get a lot of different types of questions. And so certainly feel free to ask me anything you want to ask me. Quickly, I grew up in a small town in south central Minnesota. And like he said, I had a great family. I had a great childhood. Like looking back, I had a lot of success, athletically, educationally, socially. I just had all this positivity in my life. And I really took that all for granted, and I focused on the one thing we didn't have, and that was money. So growing up, I thought, well, I'm not happy, and I have all this other stuff, so money must be the one thing that I need to make me happy. That's gonna like seal the deal. And as I grew up, it became about, never striving for happiness or real success. What I was striving for in my life was the appearance of success in my life. I just wanted to look, like I was happy and successful, and my life was perfect. And so, really from a young age, a lot of my life I was just faking things, faking happiness, faking, all these things in my life. So I went into accounting because, in my little town, the 2 CPAs in our town had nice cars, had nice homes. I thought that's what I want. I want that financial success. I thought that's what was going to bring me happiness. And so I went to college. I went to a little school called Gus Davis Adolphus College. And I went there really with not the goal of getting an education. I didn't go there with the goal of experiencing college life. I went there to get a degree, to get a job. And so my focus was just get through school as quickly as possible. I graduated in 3.5 years. My grades were average. So I found out my senior year, when all the big firms were coming to campus to interview, I didn't qualify to interview for the firms that I wanted to work for because I didn't have a high enough GPA. And so my first job out of college was with a small CPA firm in the Twin Cities. Firm. It was a CPA, his wife and his daughter. So another great opportunity that I just kind of took for granted, a small CPA firm with a lot of small businesses. And so I got to really dig into all these parts of accounting, doing, compilation work for companies, probably 100,000 to maybe 4 to 5 million in revenue, but blue collar stuff, electricians, plumbers, liquor stores, stuff like that. And so just a great learning experience in doing everything for these small businesses. And so digging into their financials, doing their payroll, doing their taxes, doing all of that stuff in a great family environment. And again, my focus was on, well, I have friends working for the big firms, they're making way more money than I am, so I need to figure the next play out, and again, just not appreciating what I had there. And so in October of 1997, I got a job with ReliStar Life Insurance Company in Minneapolis in the reinsurance division. And I had no idea what reinsurance was at the time. So I go to work there, entry-level job, I get trained in, very different from what I was used to working in at the CPA firm because we all use the same computers, we didn't have logins, no passwords, none of that stuff. And so I go there my first day and I find out, okay, we have these systems, you have to have a user ID and a password, your password's gonna change every 30 days. And the girl that trained me in said, since we have to change it every 30 days, I do mine like this. And she told me she did her initials, the month and the year. And I thought, I'm gonna do the same thing. So NJM OCT 97, and every month I just changed the month and the year. And so in practice, what that meant is I knew her password for the next 10 years. And she became one of my best friends. And so, but all the while, I always knew her password because it was always the same as mine. So moving forward there, I was being promoted, I was getting more responsibility, things were going great. A couple things happened that kind of, in my mind, helped me further the road to fraud for me. So I passed the CPA exam, so at that time I was promoted to accounting manager, and my main function within our division, because I worked in the reinsurance division, which was within an organization, so we had corporate, treasury, accounts payable, we had all these corporate things, but my main function was overseeing the cash processes within our division, being the liaison with banks, with AP, with treasury. My people did all the, from entering the cash receipts and cash payments, doing the requests, reconciling bank accounts, reconciling expense accounts, all that stuff kind of went under me. And so just managing that process put me in a place where I knew how systems worked, and it played a part later on in my fraud. Sarbanes-Oxley came down, and this was like right about the time that I started my fraud, but when SOX came down, I was part of the team that was going to set up all of our new controls. So I understood the controls, I understood how they worked, I understood why they were in place, which helped me manipulate those things later on. I wasn't in these meetings setting things up a certain way so that I could get around them, but it just played a part that I was in those meetings and I understood all that stuff and why it was in place and who was going to do what. it just gave me a great understanding, and it helped me manipulate all of those controls later on. The other thing was, you know, in our matrix of all of our new SOX controls, once everything was in place, I was the responsible party for every control around cash. And so when auditors or anybody else came into our division, they were given this matrix and they said, if you have any questions about anything, go to the responsible party. So when auditors were starting to see things that didn't make sense, instead of going to my boss, they came to me and asked me. So I was like the first line of defense to protect my fraud from people who were asking questions and digging into things I didn't want them to dig into. And so that really helped. So the last piece was in 99 or 2000, a company called ING came into the United States and started buying up life insurance companies. And so as part of their plan to spend $20 billion in the US in that year, they purchased ReliStar. And so once they owned all of these life insurance companies all over the US, they figured out, okay, every single one of these people is on a different ERP system. In the insurance world, you have all these admin systems that feed into your ERP that are, claim systems, things that are tracking, because in insurance, you have to track down to a contract level, and ERP systems don't normally track at that level. So they were gonna roll out PeopleSoft to all their new life insurance companies, and so it was a huge project to roll that out, make sure that all the feeder systems, all the admin systems were feeding in properly. And so I was on that team, the PeopleSoft Advisory Council. They basically took an accounting person from every division of every life insurance company they had around the US. They put us on a team and they said, okay, we need to know what you need out of PeopleSoft. Functionality, how you're gonna use it, things you need. We also need you to really become experts in PeopleSoft so that you can help with training, you can be in a better place to deal with issues when they arise when we go live. We did all the testing internally, the parallel. And so what that project did for me was, coming out of that, I had power user access. So I had access to PeopleSoft other people didn't have. So I could go into reports and manipulate reports and write reports and do things other people couldn't do, which played a part in the cover up of my fraud. The other thing was in the training part of it, we had a lot of internal training in PeopleSoft, and that training was specific to how we were going to use PeopleSoft at ING. I also had external training, so I learned a bunch of stuff that you could do in PeopleSoft that ING was not using, but was stuff that was like not turned off. So I knew how to do things other people within ING didn't know was possible. And so just quickly, in my personal life, my now ex-wife, when I met her in college, right before I finished school, I thought this is the perfect woman for me. I was trying to build, this image of the perfect, the American dream. And I met her and I didn't think, well, she's perfect for me, but I thought she's perfect for the life I'm trying to create. She's smart, athletic, beautiful, funny, just kind, just an amazing person. And I thought, this woman would make me look better. She kind of fulfills part of the fake life I'm trying to create. And so, as we started dating and got engaged, really every part of my life was becoming fake for appearances. And my marriage was one of those things too. And so, after we go live with PeopleSoft, it was Christmas time of 2001, and my boss came into my office and frantically said, I need you to wire $50 million to our London subsidiary. And somebody had screwed something up, and so for regulatory purposes, the money needed to be in the London bank account before the end of the year. So I was like, okay, it's 2:00 on a Friday, I need to get this wire approved, and at that time I didn't know anybody who could approve that large of a wire. So I opened up our approval matrix within, ING AP put out this approval matrix, everybody that has approval authority. So I'm looking through the list of people trying to find somebody that could approve a $50 million wire, and I found my own name as well as my coworker. It said that we had $250,000 approval limit on checks, which I recognized instantly, like that's a pretty big screw up giving the requesters approval authority. And so it was me and my coworker whose password I knew. So at the time, I recognized what I should do is contact accounts payable, have them revoke that authority. I think subconsciously I left it out there. What I thought at the time was, I'll worry about that later. I need to get this money sent out, and then I'll worry about that. And so found somebody to approve the wire. I got the money sent out. I went home that day, and on my drive home, it really hit me that I could steal money. I could request a payment as myself and approve it as my coworker or vice versa. And my thought at that time was, I'd never do that. Like, I'm an honest person. And what are my problems, in my life was always assuming I was an honest person. You know, going to business ethics class in college, I don't need this class, I'm an honest person. And so just the dismissal in my mind that I could ever do anything wrong meant I just didn't think about things I was doing. And in fact, I was making bad choices all the time. And so same thing at that time, I thought, okay, yes, I have access, I could steal money. I'd never do that, so I don't need to contact accounts payable and revoke that. I'm just gonna leave it out there, you know? So about a year and a half go by, and I thought about it often. You know, I really felt like I had this pot of gold under my desk. Like I knew I could steal money. I thought it would be really easy, but my thought was always the same. Like, that's just not me. I'm not that person. So fast forward to early in 2003, my wife was pregnant, and kind of how I said everything in my life was about appearances. We were talking about what we should do when our daughter was born, and my thought was the best thing for our daughter is for, you know, her to be home with one of her parents. You know, real old school thought, well, my wife should quit her amazing job and stay home, and I should continue working and support the family. And so, but the unhealthy side of that, more so than just being like a sexist comment, was, to me, it was that made me look more successful. Like being able to support the family and my wife being able to stay home, to me, that was gonna make me look more successful. And I was making choices in my life based on that fact. Like, how can I make myself look more important, more successful? And so we had a discussion about that, and I basically convinced her that, you know, she had a great job. She's a lot smarter than I am. I convinced her to quit her career and stay home when our daughter was born. And so as soon as she agreed to that, my thought was, well, wait a second, can I actually afford to support the family, you know? When I started with ReliStar, and the whole 10 years I was with ReliStar and ING, I continued working nights and weekends at the CPA firm. So I was working really almost two full-time jobs. So yeah, I'm making good money. The next lie was coming out of college, you know, I had school loans, I had credit card debt, I had all this debt in my life that I like carried shame with my financial situation. And with my ex-wife, she didn't have that stuff. And so I kept it from her, you know. I didn't tell her about it. I kind of kept our financial lives separate within our marriage. You know, I handled our finances, I paid our bills, I did our taxes, I handled the money. But I had a bunch of debt she didn't know about. So when I had convinced her to quit her job, my thought was, yeah, I can support the family, but I also have this debt over here that I'm trying to pay off. And so at that point, my options are be honest with her, come clean about this debt I have, or figure out a way to pay it off. And so what I did was, so that's when the thought of committing fraud to pay off that debt, that's when that really, like, honestly came into my head, like, as an option. And so I convinced myself, and this was a complete lie to myself, but I convinced myself that the only way I'm going to be able to support my family is by stealing money, getting out of debt, so that she can stay home and like our, you know, life can be normal. And so the reality was, I was always living, I was living beyond my means at this point, and I wasn't willing to give up that lifestyle. Had I just budgeted and spent money like a normal person, I could easily have been in a great financial situation. But I convinced myself that it was my only option to support my family, was to steal money and get out of debt. So that's what I convinced myself. So I went into work one day and I said to myself, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna steal money, I'm gonna pay off this debt. Once that's paid off, everything will be okay. So at that point, I was like, well, how am I gonna do this? I know how to get my hands on the check, like, you know, requesting a check, picking it up, getting my hands on the actual check. I knew how I was gonna do that, but who am I gonna cut the check to? I can't cut the check to myself. So I decided, I had a credit card with a financial institution that was the same name as a life insurance company we use. So I thought, okay, I can cut a check straight to my credit card. On the system, the payee is gonna look like this life insurance company. To the credit card company, it's just gonna look like they're getting a payment to their name from my company. But I thought, what is my credit card company gonna think if they start getting checks from my employer? Is that gonna be weird to them? And so I called up my credit card company and I said, is it okay if my employer reimburses my travel expenses by cutting checks to you directly? And the person I spoke with at the credit card company said, we don't care who pays us as long as somebody pays us. And so I thought, perfect, you know, like basically thank you, you know. So that's what I was gonna do. So I waited until, so I knew that I could request a check as myself and approve it as my coworker. I knew that side of it. Getting my hands on the check, basically The checks were printed off across the street. A girl that worked for me had to walk across the street, pick up the checks, bring them to my boss. I was the backup for both of those jobs. So if she was out, I picked up the checks. If my boss was out, she brought the checks to him for approval. So if he was out, I would be the one to get the checks for approval. So one of those two people had to be out for me to steal money and get my hands on the actual check. So I waited till the girl that worked for me was gonna be out. I logged in as myself. I requested a check for $1,100. I logged out, I logged right back in as my coworker, I approved that check. So that's when the misery of committing fraud really hit me. I wasn't just stealing money, I wasn't just committing fraud, I was using one of my best friend's passwords to do it. I was betraying the trust of one of my closest friends. And so it didn't stop me, but just the guilt and the anxiety and the fear and all the negative feelings around committing fraud, they hit me hard right then. And I hadn't even picked up the check or spent it or anything. I had just approved it. And so next day I pick up the check, I mail it off to my credit card company. 2 days after that, I can see it hit my credit card statement online. The day after that, I can see on PeopleSoft it cleared the bank. And I was just stunned. It was very easy, it worked, and I really, going into it, didn't think it would work. But I thought the first time, if they catch it the first time, I can play it off as some sort of a screw up or an error. But it worked really well, and it was really easy. And so over that summer, basically I just did the same thing. Anytime my boss or my coworker were out of work, I would request a check as myself, approve it as my coworker, pick it up the next day and mail it off to my credit card company. 2 days later, it would hit my account statement. The day after that, it would clear the bank. Every time. So the amounts were growing a little bit. So by September, this is September of 03, my daughter was due at the end of September of 03. Beginning of 03, I do the normal process, mail it off. By this time, I'm extremely paranoid that I'm gonna be caught, by the way. By this time, I'm somebody's gotta figure this out. Mail the check off. 2 days later, it doesn't hit my account statement. The day after that, it doesn't clear the bank. So a week goes by, nothing happened. And it had worked the exact same every single time I had done it. So now I'm they found it. I'm about to go to jail, this is over. So about 2 weeks go by, and I walked into work. I had an inter-office envelope in my mailbox. I opened it up, and there was the check. So what happened was I had forgot to put my account information on the check. So when I mailed it off, credit card company got it, didn't know what to do with it. They mailed it back to the address on the check, which was accounts payable in Atlanta. When accounts payable got the check, they looked it up online, saw that I was the requester, and just sent it back to me. And so I don't think that's the right process, but it was somebody I worked with on a daily basis, somebody that knew me really well. And so when she saw that I had, this check was mine, she just sent it back to me. And so when I got that check back, I was basically, this is your sign from God to stop this. You got away with one there. Objectively, I had done what I set out to do, and that I had paid off my debt. I had paid all that stuff off. So when that check came back, I voided it, stopped the fraud. My daughter was born, so I had to go through year end, really just hoping that one of these payments didn't randomly get pulled for an audit. And so I made it through the audit. So by March of 2004, I think I got away with it. It's over. There's no reason anybody's ever gonna go back and look at a $2,000 payment from last year. So at this point, I should be, I don't know if happy is the right word, I should be moving forward. My little girl's 6 months old, financially speaking, I'm in a good place, my job is fine, everything's good. But as I was sitting at my desk thinking about the fraud, the thought that popped in my head was, I did all this work to steal that money and I didn't even do anything fun with it. And so at that point, I really started thinking about doing it again. The fear of that check going missing had faded off by then. And I really thought I could probably have some fun if I start stealing money again. And so I decided, it's like the first time, I decided I'm gonna do it again. And so again, I went into brainstorming mode about how I was gonna do it. Very much, I think, embezzlement 101. I just decided I'm going to set up a company with the same name as somebody we do business with. I'm going to cut checks to my own company, and as long as the payee in the system looks normal, it's not going to raise any red flags. And so I went through the motions of setting up a business, You couldn't do it all online back then, so it took about 10 days to get that set up. But I had a federal ID number, I had a business bank account, I had a PO box, I had set up the name with the Secretary of State. I had a business on paper that I had set up solely to steal money. So once that was all in place, I have all the records for this, which is why I'm so specific to dates and stuff. Like, I kept meticulous records and spreadsheets of my entire fraud. I have all the setting up the fake business paperwork. I have a list of every check I stole, where stuff is, where stuff went. So I had great records of everything, and I still have all that stuff. So anyway, I think April 4th was the day that all my stuff was finally ready. So same process on Friday, request a check. What I call phase 2 of my fraud. My first check was about $27,000. Requested it as myself, approved it as my coworker, picked it up the next day. It was the end of tax season. I'm working 12, 15-hour days on weekends. So for lunch, I go to the local Wells Fargo to deposit my check. And again, as I'm approaching the bank teller with this check, I'm like, this isn't gonna work. I set up this bank account with $50, on Wednesday, and now it's Saturday, and I have a $27,000 check that I'm depositing. So I walk up, hand her the check, she processes it, gives me the receipt, $27,000 is available instantly in my bank account. And I was like, literally scared at how easy it was and how I knew this is really gonna get out of control because it's working way too easily. So went back to work that day. At that point, I had no idea what I was, like, I didn't have a plan for this money. I just was gonna start stealing and basically see what happened. So really over the next 3.5 years at that point, my fraud grew and grew and grew to the point, 2006 was really like the craziest year. I stole like 4.3 million in 2006 and spent every dime of it. And so I stole like $1 million in 2004, $2 million in 2005, almost 4.5 in 2006, and then $1 million in 2007. So by 2007, like, my life had spiraled so much out of control. I was just miserable in every way. I mean, I had deteriorated, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, in every way. My life was just crumbling around me because of this fraud. So by mid-2007, I had separated from my wife. I wasn't talking to my family anymore. I wasn't talking to my friends anymore. I just like isolated myself off with a couple people that I surrounded myself with that really didn't care about me. They didn't ask questions because they really didn't care about me, So by 2007, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I was never at the point where I thought about turning myself in, but I knew that I'm gonna stop stealing and somebody's gonna figure it out. So I really went into just like a waiting, stop stealing and wait for something to happen. And so really how I thought I was gonna get caught, I had a million scenarios of how I was gonna get caught, but I thought, with all the audits we had going on, we had internal auditors, we had external audits, we had, SOX control testers digging through stuff, we had state insurance examiners going through our stuff every other year. Stuff was constantly being audited. And so with phase 2 of my fraud, I put every debit, every time I stole money, I put in the offsetting debit into a ledger account that I reconciled. And I'll talk about that whole process. But that growing debit out there, I thought, how are auditors not finding this? This is a multi-million-dollar unexplained debit sitting in this ledger account that I had to get past my boss on a monthly basis and get past auditors every time. And so I always thought somebody's gonna find it in an audit, but they never did. The next place I thought would be the IRS. And so I set up a company on paper to steal this money, and I reported it all on my taxes. So the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office were shocked when I said, yes, I reported every stolen dollar on my tax return. They're like, we've never seen anybody do this. I'm like, the joke is I didn't want to lose my license over this. So, you got to have an honest tax return. So yeah, I reported all that money on my tax return. And so it just looked like I had a really lucrative consulting business on the side. I just ran it through a Schedule C in my tax return. So, but I thought the IRS might come, like, oh, you made 150,000, then you made $1 million, and then 2 million, and then 4 million. Like, I thought that growth might raise some red flags, but they didn't come knocking until after I got in trouble. So then the next spot obviously is internally. who's going to catch me internally. I didn't think my boss would, and I'll explain the cover up of how I got it past everybody. But internally, if anybody's going to catch me, it's going to be my coworker. Like, she's way smarter than I am. She knows everything I know about our admin system, about PeopleSoft. I'm using her password to steal the money. If anybody's going to find it internally, it's going to be her. And so what happened was, I think my last stolen check was in April or May of 2007. So early August of 2007, we got an email from accounts payable, and it said, it was to me and my coworker and our boss, and it said, if you guys want to keep your signing authority of $250,000 on checks, you need to have this paperwork filled out, approved, and sent back to us. And as soon as I saw that email, I thought, this is it. This is how I'm going to get caught. So I instantly heard my boss and my coworker walk out in the hallway. So I went out there, and my boss said, did you guys know you had signing authority on checks? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he's like, would you guys need that? I said, no. And so our authority was revoked right then, but I knew my coworker wasn't going to just let this lie. And so she basically just went into PeopleSoft and ran a query to see if her user ID was associated with any check payments. And what she found was that she had approved $1 million in checks in 2007, which was the $1 million in checks I had stolen. So she gave that information to our boss. So early September of 2007, my boss came in my office, 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon again, and he handed me this query, and he said, can you give me the backup for these checks? And I looked, and it was $1 million in checks that I had stolen. And so at the time, I thought, he already knows, like, he's just messing with me right now. He knows that I stole this money. And so it turned out that the girl that would have had that backup had it actually existed, she was out that day. So I talked my way out of the office that Friday, and I went home that night, and I thought, I either need to get a lawyer and face this because I'm about to get busted, or I'm going to kill myself. Like, I felt at that point like I had ruined my life. And so I went home. I had my daughter that night, so I'm like, I got to face this. So found a lawyer, talked to the law firm that Friday night, set up a meeting for Saturday. I went into work on Saturday morning, and I tried to cover up my fraud. I was shredding stuff. I was creating fake documentation, just any last-ditch effort to not get caught. Even though I wanted it to be over, I was scared about what was going to happen. And so I was just in a weird spot where I want this to be over, but there's no scenario where this is over and I don't go to prison. So I left there, talked to my lawyer. He basically said, go into work Monday and find out what they know. We need to mount an offense, we need to know what they know. So I go into work Monday. I bring a notebook full of fake documentation of check requests for all my stolen money. And I explained to him, I had set it up it's a long story, but I had set up the fake company with the same name as this insurance broker we used in Bermuda that did a lot of weird, shady stuff. And so, it's a long story. At any rate, I explained that these were refunds of payments that we didn't know how to apply, and which was something that happened with this broker. So he's like, oh, okay. And so at that point, he takes my fake documentation upstairs to show it to his boss, our CFO. And at this point, I'm like, they're going to figure it out, because it just so happened the fake documentation that I made, the signature that I've copied and faked was our CFO's. So when he brought this fake documentation up to our CFO, he was going to say, well, I didn't sign this stuff. So I literally ran out of the office that day, went home like I had said, my life was in complete shambles at this point, not talking to anybody, separated from my wife, not talking to my family. I also had a girlfriend at the time who neither my wife nor family knew about, and she was 5 months pregnant. So I had to go home to my pregnant girlfriend and tell her, sorry, everything's a lie, and I'm about to get busted and go to prison. So not a great day. So at that point, we just waited. So nothing happened that day. The next day, nothing's happening. So finally, about 10:30 that night, two fraud investigators from ING knocked on my door and confronted me about the fraud. And from that point, I was like, I'm ready to cooperate. Basically, my lawyer will, give you a call. So at that point, it was full cooperation mode. So I'll talk about what happened from then on later. Now I'm going to talk about the cover-ups. So there's the cover-up at work, like obviously how did I not get caught for 4 years of stealing millions of dollars? But there's the cover-up at home too. Like, obviously, I was married and I was stealing and spending millions of dollars. And you would think, how does your significant other not notice that? Well, it was a lot of work, to convince my wife and family and friends that this money made sense. And so, so there was a couple layers of the. First of all, with my ex-wife, She's the least materialistic person I've ever met, didn't care about money, didn't care about anything. I handled our finances. She didn't care about anything, so she never wanted anything, didn't care about money, didn't know how much I made, didn't know how much she just did not care. And so kind of the perfect victim for me in this case. Everybody knew that I worked 2 jobs. Everybody knew that the CPA that I worked for wanted me to come back and buy him out so he could retire. And so when I started stealing a little more money and spending a little more money, I told people that he was giving me more work, more clients, more money, trying to entice me back. And so people were like, oh, that makes sense. Then I got to the point where I wanted to buy some big things. And I recognized I don't have a reason to own a $35,000 motorcycle. That was the first big thing I wanted to buy. So I need to have a reason for this, to have the money to buy this motorcycle. So again, I started brainstorming. I had never been a gambler, but I knew from doing taxes, you win a jackpot over $1,200, you get a W-2G. You get a tax form that says you won X amount of dollars. Well, if I can take a bunch of money to a casino and win jackpots, I can go home with W-2Gs that say I won X amount of dollars. I don't care if I really win or lose, as long as I have the W-2Gs that say I did. So I brought like $50,000 to a local casino. I played high dollar video poker until I had won like $35,000. Went home, I had the W-2Gs, and I was like, hey, I just happened to be at a casino and won 35 grand. Can I buy this motorcycle? She's like, yeah, whatever. So I buy the motorcycle. I explain this to everybody. Just happened to be at a casino. I won the money, so I bought the motorcycle. Everybody thought it's a great story. So lucky, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, well, it worked. Well, now I want to buy this car. So back to the casino, win 50 grand this time. So basically, I just kept doing that. So in that process, I got addicted to gambling. And after I had won, 4 or 5 like big winning days at the casino, people are like, nobody wins every time they go to a casino, especially in bigger amounts every time you go. So people are really starting to question this. So how I really got this past people was 2 big things happened that allowed me to really further the gambling lie. So I started the gambling in June of 2004. In December of 2004, one of my ex-wife's friends from high school, or 2 of her friends from high school, asked us to meet them in Vegas. So we go to Vegas. I had smuggled down like $30,000 in my socks she didn't know I had. So I was hoping to win in front of her. I was just gonna lie and tell her the 30 grand I had won. So we went out to dinner the first night. We came back and everybody was just standing around. So I snuck into the high stakes like video poker slot room. I started playing, and just a fluke, I hit a $30,000 jackpot. So they see this $30,000 jackpot. They're like, oh, wow. And so that weekend, I won $56,000, legitimately won $56,000, and she saw all of it. So I went home and I was like, anybody that doubts that I'm winning this money, she saw it happen. Just a complete fluke, by the way. She just happened to be that, when I won, $56,000. So that helped me further that part of the fraud, because I was like, if you don't believe me, ask her. She saw it happen. And people were like, well, he must be telling the truth because she was there and she saw it. So that helped me further that part of the fraud. And then 6 months later, we went back to Vegas, and similar situation. On a Saturday afternoon, she had gone to nap. I went to play. I'd been playing for like a half hour. I hit a jackpot of $6,250, and she came in right as I was giving my information to the attendant to, get the money. And I was like, it's going to take him a few minutes to get the money. I'm just going to keep playing. And so I was playing $125 hand video poker, and I just moved to the machine next to the one that I had just hit a jackpot on. I put $200 bills in that machine, and on my first hand, I hit a $100,000 jackpot. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, anytime she's around, like, I hit these huge jackpots. So I ended up winning $122,000 that weekend, legitimately. And I went home with a check for $100,000. I showed it to everybody at work. I showed it to my family, friends. And people are like, it must be true, even though it was all a lie. So yeah, the gambling was what I used, and just to put it in perspective, so a couple of the numbers around this, and again, I have meticulous records of my gambling, daily win-loss. I have it all in spreadsheets, so I know exactly how much I won and lost. So my W-2G winnings over those years, in 2004, I had 178,000 in W-2G winnings. In 2005, I had 380,000. 2006, I had 870,000. In 2007, I had 1.3 million. So that's a lot of W-2Gs, Another interesting fact, out of the 40 times I went to Vegas over that 4-year period, 3 times I won money and my wife was there 2 of those 3 times. So just an absolute fluke that she happened to see me win 2 of the 3 times. I would normally wire down $150,000 for the weekend, blow it, go home with nothing. Like that was my normal Vegas weekend. So out of the $8.5 million I stole, I lost $6.2 million of it gambling. So that's where most of it went. That's why it went on so long. That's why it grew the way it did. Because my fraud changed from using the gambling to explain the winnings to I started stealing to gamble. It just became about the gambling, you know? So that was it. And after that, the final part of the cover-up was really just pushing away people in my life, you know? Like, I thought if people can't see me and they don't know what I'm up to, they're not gonna be able to question anything. And so I just pushed everybody in my life that cared for me away. So I literally, like, I had rented a house a block from the house where my ex-wife and my daughter were living, put black sheets over the windows, and I was just like secluded, basically. Just complete withdrawal from every healthy relationship, from coworkers to family to friends to everybody. So in the end, when I got busted and came clean to people, everybody's like, yeah, we knew something was going on. We didn't know it was this, but it makes sense. So that was kind of the personal side of things. So the cover-up at work, so as I was stealing the money, I decided to put that offsetting debit, I call it the fraudulent debit, I decided to put that into an account that I reconciled on a monthly basis, and it was the ugliest thing I dealt with, and this was the PeopleSoft ledger account for our Canadian subsidiary's bank account. And it was a mess because, so we had an office in Canada, everything happened in Canada. So office up there, they collected all the premiums, paid all the claims, commissions, refunds, all the assets backing reserves were in Canada. Everything was up there and it had to get onto our books in the US. And so they had 3 pieces to their business. They had their contract related stuff, which they had access to our admin system, which automatically went into PeopleSoft. They had general expense stuff that I tracked it and made the entries to PeopleSoft manually for all of their general expenses, and then their investment activity. And so they probably had $200 million in Canada, all in T-bills and bonds. And so they're earning interest payments and buying and selling T-bills and bonds. So they would send that activity to me. I put together an exhibit listing out all the activity, translating it to US dollars, forward it down to investment accounting. They make the entry. So there's those three pieces. The other thing was I had to do the bank rec for the Canadian bank account. Well, we had one ledger account in PeopleSoft that was Canadian bank account. There's actually 5 accounts in Canada, 3 in Canadian dollars and 2 in US dollars. So I was reconciling 5 accounts in 2 currencies into 1 ledger account in US dollars. So just an ugly rec, never gonna tie out because there's always foreign exchange difference. So to me, it was the perfect place to put fraud because it was already a mess. I was the only person that worked on that, what we call the Canadian package, the whole 10 years I was there. So my boss, auditors, nobody really understood all the parts of it and how it all worked. And so to me, it was the perfect place to hide fraud. So there's 2 pieces to the cover-up at work. I have this growing debit out there that I need to get past my boss on a monthly basis. I need to get past auditors. Anybody who goes through this reconciliation, there's a multi-million-dollar debit in there that I can't explain. So I had to get that past people on a monthly basis. The other thing is, my plan was not to pay this money back. So how do I get rid of that debit? I could never leave my job if I don't figure out a way to make that go away. So with phase 1 of my fraud, when I stole money, I just hit a write-off account with the offset because I could write off like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when I was stealing $2,000 here, $3,000 here, I just wrote it off and nobody ever looked at these write-off accounts. But with phase 2, as I was sticking them out there, I was like, I gotta figure out how to make this go away. So that's kind of the second piece. So with the first piece, let's say that I have a $3 million of my ledger balance is fraud. A big part of the cover-up of my fraud was I worked there for 6 years before I started my fraud. I knew processes, I knew how things worked, I knew people's limitations, I knew all these different things, and I used those things to manipulate different people, whether it was my boss or auditors. So I knew that my boss didn't know how to run a query. So on off quarter end months, I knew that he was gonna verify the ledger balance on my bank reconciliation from a query I gave him. So I run the query for the bank balance, it's $8 million, $3 million of that is fraud, so in PeopleSoft, you can run a query, download it into Excel. I would download it into Excel, subtract off the $3 million, print it out, and a tie to a fake balance. And I knew that he couldn't verify that because he didn't know how to run a query. And at that time, auditors weren't going to check that. On quarter end months, he was going to tie my reconciliation back to an actual trial balance. Same with auditors, we're going to tie it back to the trial balance or a balance sheet. So I couldn't fake the balance. So I had to fake an entry. So same process. I knew that when investment accounting makes their entry for investment activity, they make one entry to PeopleSoft for all the activity for all the business units across the United States. So when they book the quarterly investment income entry, it was thousands of lines long, representing billions of dollars in activity for the quarter. And so I would query that entry, bring it into PeopleSoft. I need a reconciling item on my rec for $3 million. So I'd find roughly a $3 million entry. I would, since I'm in Excel, I would just change the business unit to my business unit. I'd change the account to my account, and I would make it look like investment accounting hit our account in error. And I would put it on the bank rec and just say investment accounting hit our account in error, which was very common because within PeopleSoft, we could make entries across business units. And a lot of times, if somebody else got your money, instead of sending you the money, they would just do an entry across business units to transfer you, the money. And people never hit the right account. So it was very common on a monthly basis on a reconciliations to have these cash transfer entries as reconciling items because people hit the wrong accounts. And so this was really a common thing. So I would throw it on my rec, again, knowing that my boss can't run that query and verify that it was actually our business unit in our account. I knew that our auditors didn't have access to run that stuff. So nobody was going to independently verify my queries. And it was as simple as either somebody else running my queries, somebody watching me run these queries, or saying, we want the hard copy of the query, not the Excel copy. So very basic stuff. But again, it was just knowing the limitations of my boss and of auditors and what I needed to manipulate, but really basic. And so that's what I did. Every single quarter for 16 quarters in a row, I had the exact same reconciling item on that rec saying that, investment accounting screwed up their entry, they hit our account in error. By the time that they checked those things, it was a reversing entry that had usually already reversed back out. So, it was really, really basic. So on to the issue of how do I make that balance go away? I can't write it off. I can't expense it. What am I going to do? I don't want to make an entry that's just like, debit this, credit this to get rid of fraud. So I wanted to manipulate an entry that I was already doing to try and eat away at this debit balance. And so back to the Canadian package, as I'm making the exhibit for the investment activity, all of our investments were 10 million Canadian dollar increments of T-bills and bonds. So in any month, you could have 2 buys and 2 sells, 10 million Canadian dollars with another 250, 500,000 of interest received in Canadian dollars. I was supposed to translate that to US dollars using the average monthly exchange rate of Canadian dollars to US dollars. So I would calculate that rate. I put together my exhibit, $10 million buy, $10 million sell. Now that I know what my rate should be, what if I manipulate that rate based on whether it's a debit or a credit? And so basically what I did is, since I had a debit balance I was trying to get rid of, every debit that hit that account, I lowered the rate so that it was lower than it should be. Every credit that hit that account, I raised the rate so that it was higher than it should be. So over a 4-year period, every single investment entry, every credit was higher than it should be, and every debit was lower than it should be. And so over time, I ate away about $5.5 million of that balance just doing that. So I was just underreporting investment income from our Canadian subsidiary by manipulating that rate. And again, going into that, I thought, if you look at the exhibit, the rate's 0.91, all the $10 million in and out should be 9.1 million US dollars. Well, they weren't. All the credits were 9.3 million and all the debits were 9.1 million. So it was easy to see on that exhibit, but for me, I was always like testing these things out. Okay, I know that the girl that enters these things, she's like entry level, she doesn't really question anything I do. If she catches it, I'll just say it was an error. So first time I sent it down, she made the entry, never said a word about it. So every month going forward, every single credit was 1/10 of a point higher than it should be, and every debit was 1/10 of a point lower than it should be. So I didn't really have an end game as in, okay, I'm going to eat away at this balance, stop stealing, and then, once the fraud balance is completely gone out of there, I'm going to, move on. My assumption was I'm going to prison. Like I assumed I was going to get caught. So that was the cover up. So just quickly, once I got caught, I worked with ING, then I worked with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I walked into the U.S. Attorney's Office on the first day, and I laid down all the spreadsheets detailing my fraud, my bank statements, credit card statements, tax returns, everything laid out for them on day one. And so, I think they saw that I was a different type of criminal than they were used to dealing with. I was just completely honest and upfront. And I thought the easiest thing for me was going to be to get through it as honestly as possible. That was going to make the process easier, which I also hoped was going to lead to a lighter sentence, obviously. So I met with them for about 6 months until they indicted me on one count of mail fraud for the $8.5 million. I'd stolen 99 checks, so they could have came at me with 99 charges, but just one charge of mail fraud for the $8.5 million. So that was in July. In September, I pled guilty to one count of mail fraud. In January of 2009, I was sentenced to 97 months in federal prison. So I'm not going to get into it. You can ask about prison stuff if you want to ask about it. For me, I went to prison really a broken man, like my little girl was 5, my son had just turned 1. And I went to prison really thinking that my life was over, I'm never going to have meaningful work. I'm obviously never going to have any money ever again. Relationship wise, I thought, who's going to want, I was still with my son's mom at that time, but I knew that wasn't going to last. And I didn't think anybody in any area of my life would give me a chance ever again moving forward. So I had just kind of given up. I went to prison. I was like 300 pounds. I was just, my life was over, So I go to prison, find out you have to have a job in prison. I was in the federal prison camp in Duluth, Minnesota, which is, if you got to go to prison, it's where you want to go. It's an old Air Force base, so it's 100 acres, pretty open, a lot of, constructive ways to spend your time. But you do have to have a 40-hour-a-week job. So I went into the education department on, day 2 of prison to look for a job, and I met this other inmate, and I was like, I'm looking for a job. He sat me down, I told him my story, and I was crying and my life is over. And he just said, your life isn't over. He said, you have all these years ahead of you. This is your opportunity to work on yourself, to become the person you want to be. Stop faking it and actually become that person, And so he had looked at prison as an opportunity, and I definitely did not going in. And so I thought, okay, this could be a way for me to change. And so, I started exercising. I lost 75 pounds my first 5 months in prison. And just getting back into exercising, it cleared my head and it gave me some optimism. So I got a job in education. And so our job was, partly to help people get ready to get out of prison, find jobs, write resumes, renew your driver's license. We helped guys with whatever they needed help with. So my job, as an education clerk, we had an office. I had a desk with a typewriter. And so for somebody who had spent his career going to an office and sitting at a desk in prison, I got up and I went to an office and I sat at a desk. And so it was kind of our home away from home, and it was a great job to have in there. The other part of that job was the night classes for the inmates, the adult continuing education classes. And so setting the curriculum, what classes were going to be offered, who was going to teach them, and in our case, having to teach some of those classes. And so I was, like a lot of people, scared to death of public speaking. And so when they're like, you got to teach personal finance, I was like, no way. These classes are 40 inmates that don't want to be there, but they have to be there. So that's my entree to public speaking and or teaching, is getting up in front of 40 gangbangers and trying to talk to them about money. So it ended up being a great experience, and just learning how to get comfortable in front of a group. But the most positively life-changing thing that happened for me in prison was there was a community awareness program at the prison where, at the time, all the local colleges and universities could bring in their classes and see this presentation by, it was 5 white-collar inmates, and it was kind of a light version of Scared Straight. They talked about how they ended up in prison, and so you got 10 minutes to kind of tell your story. And so they said, do you want to be a part of this program? And I was like, no. Like, the thought of standing up in front of strangers and confessing my sins scared me to death, in addition to just the public speaking aspect of it. You know, I hadn't gotten comfortable yet teaching, and so my buddy was just like, it's a good program, you should give it a try. And so the first time I told my story, I think it was 8 college kids, and I was scared to death. But what I found was just being honest. It was very therapeutic to talk about it. You know, it was rewarding to feel like I was helping these kids, you know, through my own mistakes. So I really loved it. I wasn't completely comfortable in the process of standing up and speaking in front of them, but the feelings that I was feeling as I was doing it, I was like, this is really helping me understand, you know, what I did and why I did it. So the more and more I spoke, it just continued to feel more and more therapeutic, you know. So I really loved it. So that program grew, and we got to the point where it was down to me and my buddy, and they started taking us out into the community to speak. So we got to go out and speak at Chamber of Commerce events and all, you know, Rotary clubs and all these types of things. And then it just grew into all these different areas. We were going into companies and doing, you know, annual fraud awareness training for all these different companies and doing all these things. And so what the program did for me was, it was kind of twofold. Personally, it gave me some confidence. You know, it gave me some confidence both in myself and confidence in having something to offer. You know, I didn't think anybody was gonna like hire me to be their accountant anymore, but I felt like I at least had some skill, I had something to offer, and it helped my confidence especially as I was about to get out of prison. So the other thing was, how is society gonna take us back? And what I found when we were out speaking was that people were so supportive. The people we spoke to were so supportive about, you know, how can we help you? How can we help you in the situation you're in now? I got multiple job offers to go and be like an internal auditor for companies that I spoke for when I was in prison. And so just seeing the support that people gave us, it really, again, gave me some optimism about how the general public was going to take me back when I got out of prison. And so it was really positively life-changing being a part of that program, which then turned into, you know, speaking professionally once I got out of prison too. So I really loved that program. And so quickly what happened post-prison, my Journal of Accountancy article was published the month before I got out of prison, which I thought was pretty cool. I never thought it would be, you know, published in the Journal of Accountancy, and to do it from prison was cool. I had made some connections in the world of, you know, fraud and speaking and stuff like that, and so a guy that I was in prison with was like, hey, my dad's a CPA, you should talk to him, you know, maybe he can help you find work when you get out. And so I met his dad in the prison visiting room, and so basically had a job interview in the prison visiting room, pretty standard. And he was just like, I don't know, let's see, you know, maybe I can help you find something to get out. So when I got out of prison, I had a perfect opportunity in that my sister had just moved into a new house. She had a little studio apartment in her garage, so I had a place to live. My mom gave me her car. I got a job with my brother-in-law's landscape company. So I had a job, I had a place to live, I had all this support. So I got out of prison, I got to go straight to home confinement for 6 months, where you're still a federal inmate, but you're at home, and I could see my kids, and I could go to work and start, you know, supporting myself and supporting my kids. And so I was trying to figure out what to do, because laying sod was not my long-term goal, obviously. But I knew nobody was going to hire me to be an accountant. So I had some opportunities pop up through this CPA. Probation wouldn't let me do the things he wanted me to do, but I did start getting offers to speak, to, you know, be paid to speak. And so I went to work for this CPA, just doing like CPE training and speaking, doing fraud awareness and ethics training and stuff. And so the first couple years, if I wasn't speaking, I was laying sod for my brother-in-law's company. But I was happy just to be like supporting myself and supporting my kids and like getting back to a somewhat normal life. Like getting out of prison was really hard. I was in prison for 5.5 years, and I was very institutionalized. And so it was really hard to come back to the real world and just get comfortable. And so I did that for a couple years, and then it got to the point where the CPA and I were both like, he's like, I got off probation early. He said, you don't need me. Just go off and do this on your own. And the reality was, I did all my own booking. I wrote my own contracts. I did, like, the only thing he did was collected money and paid me. So I went off on my own. Speaking was going great in downtimes. I mean, I was driving Uber and Lyft. I was doing anything I could do to legitimately support myself and my family. So on a personal level, so my oldest, she just turned 18. I have a 13-year-old son. I got married a couple years ago, and we have a daughter who just turned 4. She was born on my birthday. And then our little boy is 19 months. And so personally, my life is amazing. I get to be a dad. I have an amazing wife. My support all through prison from my friends and family was amazing. So super close with everybody in my life, closer than we ever were before. So last year when COVID hit, in 2019, I had like 45 speaking events, and life was great. Like I was, speaking tons of time to be home with my kids, with my family. And then COVID hit, and me and my wife both basically, like, all of our work dried up. And so we were both unemployed. It was kind of a nasty situation last year, trying to figure out what to do. And I had been trying to find a real job for a long time, and I got, obviously I don't hide from my past. I'm not gonna go through a job interview and you're not gonna notice my background. So I had a situation where I knew 999 out of 1,000 people were not interested in hiring me, but I knew, because I had had multiple job offers over the years from people, but nobody in Minneapolis. Like, hey, if you're willing to move to Dallas, we'll hire you. And I'm like, I'm not moving to Dallas. Like, my family's in Minnesota. And so I knew people would hire me. So I just had to find the right situation. And so by January of this year, I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I was literally like about to give up. I just didn't know. Some speaking had come back, but that's all changed. And I got to the point where I was, down to the last 2 people on a job, and the other person got it. And so right as I was about to give up, I got a call from the guy from prison whose dad I worked for. And he's like, are you looking for work? And I was like, yeah. And so quickly, him and another guy had started this online retail business in 2015, right after he got out of prison. And last year they did 40 million in sales. And so he's doing really well. But they were looking for a place to put their capital as 2 smart real estate professionals. So they got into self-storage in 2016. And so they've built this self-storage business from the ground up. It started out as them, 2 people, 10 people. When I started in February, we had 25 people. They've done over 130 million in acquisitions this year, and I think we have 60 to 70 employees now. And so I got a job as an accountant. There's 3 partners, one I was in prison with. So really other than we're very conscious about what I can do and not having bank access and not having access to certain things, but everything I can do, they're cool with me doing. And so just having the trust of the owners, being able to do stuff that I love to do, it's something I don't take for granted anymore. My perspective on life after losing everything, figuring out what's really important, and then all these years later, having an opportunity to do a job I love in the best company I've ever worked for great people, it's just, I still pinch myself every day that I get to do this. It's just crazy. So I know that self-storage doesn't sound very exciting, but it really is, a lot of what I do is doing like the due diligence and the upfront underwriting of our deals. And so, to think that I was about to give up on life in January, and then a couple months later, I was on a private jet flying because we were buying a $20 million property in New York. Like, that's a cool transition from bottom of the barrel to really feeling like life is 100% moving in the right direction now. My family life is amazing, and now my work life is amazing too. So, and I get to keep doing the speaking too, so, which I still love. So, questions? Nope, I'm out of here.
David, what's the future look like?
He asked what the future looks like. For me, the future is, again, like my restitution, I still owe $7,590,000 and change. So, you know, that plays a big part of my financial life. So I bought this suit in 2003. I bought this shirt in 2003. Like, I don't have any new stuff. I'm really good at living poor. Most of my money goes to restitution and child support and the places that it should go. And so, on a personal level, I mean, I'll never be able to retire. Luckily, I'm in a job that I love. I just turned 48. I know that, you know, I feel like I was given like a second chance, and I kind of feel like that with work, but also with my marriage, with my children. Obviously, I still get to be a father to my older children, but I feel like the younger ones, I feel like I'm gonna hopefully do it the right way this time. So every part of my life feels like I've been given a second chance from my family, from my friends, in my relationship with my kids, with my job. And so it's basically like a lifetime goal for me to regain trust of the people in my life. And it's not something that I can't go to my ex-wife and say, hey, like, I'm an honest guy now, so you can trust me. It's just every single day of my life, do the right thing. You know, there's no reason to talk about what I'm gonna do. All I can do is do the right thing. And so that's how I live my life now. So 100% fully appreciating every amazing thing in it now, never taking anything for granted. And also not making choices without thinking about consequences. So I just really, it's weird to say I'm really grateful for what prison gave me, but I'm really grateful for what prison gave me, because it gave me, it was a reset button for me in a lot of ways, and it showed me what's important in life. And luckily for me, the people in my life were willing to forgive me and move forward with me. So again, it's like none of that is lost on me, how lucky I am to have those people in my life and have the opportunities that I have. So, truly grateful. Yeah.
What would you, or advice would you give your boss? Things he could have done differently, either support you or prevent it? What would you tell him?
I mean, as far as things my boss could have done, the biggest thing he did wrong is he trusted me. You know, I'd worked there for years. I did have too much trust. Some of it was known. Some of it was an error. There was a lot of things within that organization that were, you know, weak controls, no transparency, no communication. So for me, I very much disliked the executive level where I worked. It's not why I did what I did, but to me, it felt like a bonus to be screwing over the people that I didn't feel like treated us fairly. And here's an example, like where I work now, 100% transparency, 100% open door. I can go into the partner's office and tell them anything I'm thinking at any time, and anybody can do that. And just to have like an honest back and forth, upward and downward communication that's honest, it goes such a long way with people. And so here's an example of something like common at ING. So at ReliaStar at the time. So ING is coming in, they're doing due diligence on us because they want to buy us. My boss is given a $70,000 state pay bonus, and he's supposed to put together all the financial information. He doesn't know how to run reports, so he unloads all the work onto us, lies to us about what it's for, gives the work back up, and he gets the money and lies to our face about it. And so for me, I'm like, well, I see you got that money. I know that ING's looking at us, but you guys are still going to lie to my face. So again, it's not why I did it, and I understand why they did that, but to me, it was just stuff that upset me. You know, it was very much a, this is what we're gonna do. We don't care what you think, just go do what you're told. We don't want your input. We don't want to be honest with you about anything really. So, you know, those things are all factors in how that company was run. Just a lot of dishonesty. I mean, other than trusting me and being able to properly run a report and a query, I don't know that there's much else my boss could have done to stop me. Had I not stumbled upon the ability to, that we had that signing authority, I wasn't seeking it out. So it was just like a weird group of, things that happen, opportunities that presented themselves to me, talking about the fraud triangle. I wasn't looking for those opportunities. But when I found them, I took advantage of them. But yeah, and as far as the fallout from what I did too, my boss was fired. My boss and my boss's boss were both fired. So as I was working through the guilt of all the people that I hurt, finding out that I didn't dislike those guys, and I didn't think about whether it was my coworker or my boss or my boss's boss. I was too selfish to think about how what I was doing was going to affect all of these people around me. And so it was just like, more guilt to deal with when those things happen. So it's a good question. Yeah.
Were you able to repair that relationship with that coworker who initially used to?
No, she's the one person that I lost as far as friends in my life. And so from the day that I ran out of the office until my sentencing was about 15 months, and I hadn't seen her or talked to her or anything. She was at my sentencing, and then she reached out to me the next day and she said she wanted to talk. So we met up, in the couple weeks in between my sentencing and when I had to go to prison. We met up, talked, and she was curious about what level of personal manipulation I had over her, as in, was I doing things to manipulate her throughout this time? And really, number one, I knew her password, which is all I needed. And the other thing was she had a spreadsheet of all of her passwords for every account she had in her desk drawer. So she worked remotely 2 days a week. And so there were times, you're all old enough to remember working remotely in early 2000s and how you got your little key card and your modem goes, and you're got to put in your 6 digits in 15 seconds and hope it catches. So there was just stuff that didn't work for her. So she would be like, hey, can you log into this as me? And we got to get this done by 2:00. And so it was just common for me to be logging in as her. So I wasn't other than using her credentials, I wasn't personally doing things to manipulate what she was doing. And so we talked through a bunch of stuff. We ended up having lunch the week before I went to prison. We talked through a bunch of stuff. And when we left, I thought it was salvageable, but she would send me a Christmas card every year, and every year her Christmas card, the note she wrote me got angrier and angrier, to the point where right before the year that I was gonna come home, she basically attacked me for all the, just a bunch of different stuff. And so at that point I was just if I'm not gonna be a positive influence in your life, it doesn't make sense for us to continue talking, I think part of it was because of what I did, she was implicated because I used her password. So ING and the FBI thought that we were in on it together based on how I did it. And so I had to prove to them that she was not in on it. And then my boss and my boss's boss were fired and she was promoted. So she's the VP and controller now of that division. But she was not happy, with that, obviously. And so when I got home, I emailed her and I just said, hey, is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you want to go through? Obviously, it would look bad probably if her and I were friends at this point. But she just told me, she said, I don't have any more questions and don't ever contact me again. And so that was, other than she was at a presentation I did a couple years ago in Minneapolis for the Minnesota Society of CPAs, which was really hard to do this presentation in front of her, She was there, some of my other coworkers were there. That was tough, Right before I went on stage, she walked in and she walked right by me and didn't acknowledge me, which wasn't great. It wasn't a great feeling. And then just telling the story on stage and being mindful of her, and actually my ex-brother-in-law was in the audience for that too, and some other people I knew were there. So it was a hard presentation to give. And then in the Q&A session, somebody said, what do your old coworkers think of you now? And I was like, you could ask her. but yeah, we haven't had any contact. So, yeah.
Who was the hardest person to tell when you knew you were caught for that? Is it your parents, your children?
It was hard telling everybody. That stuff didn't compare to saying bye to my kids when I had to go to prison. That was the worst day of my life, which I'll still cry about if I try and talk about. I mean, it was hard for everybody, but I had this kind of thing where people have given me credit for hitting rock bottom and rebuilding my life. When I got to the point where everything fell apart, I didn't feel like I had any option other than just to come clean to people, and so I didn't feel like it was an option to hide from those things anymore. And so I also, when I got busted, my lawyer sent me to a forensic psychologist who just deals with criminals, basically, and to do like a psych evaluation for the courts. And he did his psych evaluation, and he was like, "I've never seen anybody like you before," which I don't know how to take that, but he said, "I think I can help you." And so he treated me for free for the year before I went to prison. And so a big part of his treatment was, he was like the one person in life I couldn't BS. I could not lie to this guy, and he held me accountable. And he made me bring my ex-wife to therapy and come clean to her about everything, and my parents. And so even the people that I hadn't already like fully come clean to, he made me do it in front of him so I couldn't lie about anything, which was great because it was like the first step to really mending those relationships. And so it was hard. Like I'm trying to think, I think the day that I ran out of the office was September 17th or 18th, and my birthday is the 23rd, and my daughter's birthday is the 28th. And so my lawyer said, "You can't talk to anybody about this." And so he's like, "You can't go to your daughter's birthday party, her 4th birthday party." And so, which she still brings up. So I told my parents and my sister that when you leave Julia's party, I want you to stop by my house. And so I just sat them down and told them everything, and it sucked, it wasn't just, "Hey, by the way, I'm going to prison." I said, "I also have a girlfriend you don't know about that's pregnant." I had a lot of stuff to drop on people, and they were hard conversations, but it just was like, it just had to happen. So it was a lot of hard conversations over that year. But yeah, nothing compared to actually saying goodbye to my kids. As far as telling my kids with my little girl, first I moved out, then it was, Daddy's having a new baby with somebody else. So we were using a child psychologist to help us navigate how do you tell a 3-year-old this, or how do you tell a 4-year-old this. And so then it was a new baby, and then it was Daddy took something that wasn't his and he has a timeout. And then, it was, my ex only brought her up to see me once a year, which again, I can't talk about. But our conversations on the phone, just over time, she finally said, "You're in jail, aren't you?" And I said, "Yep." And so it was just a ongoing thing to explain to her and help her understand what happened and why it happened. And but yeah, that's an interesting question. I've done this, I don't know, 200 plus times, and I still get questions I've never had before. Nobody's ever asked that exact question. But it was one of those things, going home that day and telling my pregnant girlfriend, "I stole millions of dollars and I'm going to prison." That sucked. And then telling my wife at the time, I called her over and told her, and from that day forward, she never let me see my daughter again without her. From before her 4th birthday until she was 12, I was never alone with my daughter.
As far as how often you could see them, just once a year, is that the rule, or is that?
No, that was just my ex-wife.
Your ex-wife's choice.
Yeah. My son I saw every other weekend because my mom and dad had him. But my ex was I'd had a conversation with her about, I want to make sure I'm going to see Julia. And she had family in Duluth, so she had a reason to be up there. And what she said before I went to prison was, "It might be 6 weeks, but I promise I'll bring her up to see you." The first time she came up was 18 months after I got to prison. And after that, it was once a year, 3 hours a year I got to see her. And then it was say goodbye again for another year, which was horrible. And then
What's your relationship with her now?
She's 18 now. She's an amazing kid. When I got back, all she said is, I don't care what happened, I just don't ever want you to leave again. And that was it, you know. Even when I got home, my ex made it hard for me to see her and spend time with her, and it just was like one of those things that I couldn't come home from prison and push myself into anybody's life. I was the one who screwed up. I had to get back into people's lives how they brought me back in on their schedule. That's the way that I approached it. So, yeah, no, I mean, obviously I don't have a normal relationship. I have, you know, 2 exes with kids, and I have a wife. I have 4 kids between 18 and 1-year-old. I have a lot of weird things in my life, but every part of it has gotten better over the time. I've been home for 7 years now, and I'm always aware of my history and my felony, and it comes up on a lot of different ways all the time, from my restitution to, you know, the U.S. Attorney's Office. They can come in at any time, and so I just had a review, and you know, you have to provide W-2s, 1099s, tax returns, bank statements, every part of your life for a 6-month period, so that they don't assess your restitution based on your amount. They assess it based on your ability to pay. So really, I got this new awesome job, and they came in and assessed my thing, and they jacked my restitution up 5 times what I was paying. So really, I'm not making any more than I was making when I was unemployed. I'm just able to pay more to my victim. So, but honestly, like, that's how it should be. Like, I wish I could pay off my restitution. So, but yeah, there's constant reminders in every area of my life, from not being able to get a mortgage to not being able to, you know, people wouldn't rent to me, not being able to find jobs, financial stuff. It's a constant reminder. So.
The next virtual question is, did you serve your full prison term, or were you let out early?
So in the federal system, you do 85% of your sentence. So on day 1, you get your sentence computation, and it lists out your entire sentence, but you get your good time on day 1. And so my sentence was 97 months. My good time was 380 days. So that basically gets me down to 7 years and 2 weeks. Then if you successfully take part in RDAP, which is a residential drug abuse program. So if you have documented drug use or drinking in the 2 years up to your getting busted, basically, you qualify to take this drug program. It's a 40-week residential drug abuse program, and you can get up to a year off if you do that. So I went through that program, I got the year off. So that gets me down to basically 6 years and 2 weeks. And then you do your last 6 months of your time on home confinement or in the halfway house. So I did 5 years, 6 months, and 17 days in prison, 6 months of home confinement, and then a year of good time and a year off for the drug program. And then I had 3 years of probation, which I got off probation early because I was really low risk. So.
Okay, the next question is, have you had counseling related to your gambling addiction? If so, has that helped you reconcile your actions?
Yeah, so, I mean, heavy therapy before I went to prison. In prison, they don't offer, there's a psychiatrist on staff at the prison, but they don't treat you, they just medicate you. So there's no like real mental health option there. But once I got into the drug program, when you go into that drug program, even though the program's 40 weeks long, you enter the dorm, you know, could be 3, 6, 9 months before you enter the program, and then you stay in the dorm until you're gone. And while you're in that dorm, you have to go to, depending on what your issues are, Gamblers Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, they offer all of those different things. The AA group was a group of guys off the streets that came up and did their AA meeting with us in the prison. So I went through a lot of that. When I got out of prison, so I went through the program, I had aftercare when I got out of prison, and then while I was on probation, I had to go to weekly GA and AA meetings as well. So, yeah, I went through a lot of therapy for that stuff. For me, the lasting thing in my life of that time is the gambling, because for me, the addiction was more about casino life and how I was treated when I went to a Vegas casino with $200,000 versus like gambling. Prison is nothing but gambling. People are betting on everything, push-ups, all these different stupid stuff that they gamble on constantly. There's tons of sports gambling. I didn't do any of that stuff. It wasn't about the gambling, it was about casinos. But in this day and age, there's casinos everywhere. It's not just Vegas anymore. It's when I'm on the road, there's casinos everywhere. And so it's one of those things, I know that I need to stay away from that. I'm very deliberate in knowing that I can't walk into a casino. That would be, number one, it would ruin my life, because I know I would go back gambling. And from the standpoint that my wife knows everything about me, and so there's no, there's a lot of things I'm not allowed to do based on my wife. And so she tracks where I am at all times on that. So it's not like I can sneak off and go into a casino. Although I spoke at a conference at the Borgata in Atlantic City 2 years ago, and obviously she came with me. So, but yeah, that's like the one holdover. It's the one thing I know that I can never do again. So definitely played a big role in my life and continues to.
That's it for virtual.
Rarely am I at a loss for words, but I want to thank you for your contrition, your humility, and your courage for being able to share your experience with us, and the learnings that we take away. I wish you all the best in life, my friend, and hope it goes well for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. If anybody has questions, if anybody has anything to say, I know sometimes people don't like to ask their questions in front of the group. I'll be around for a little bit. I do have to drive back to Minneapolis tonight, so let me know. But I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.